actually.
Ta-da!
Hello.
Hi there, Dayna.
How
Good
are
to see
you?
Hey there.
Good to meet you.
Perfect timing. We have people filing in, but this is a perfect way to kind of get started. So thank you everyone so much for joining us today. I'm Megan Kelly. I'm an investor at First Round in New York, and I help lead All Raises community efforts in NYC. We're joined by Dayna Grayson, who's a GP at Contract Capital, and Ric Fulop, who is the co-founder and CEO of Desktop Metal. Dayna and Ric are going to lead us on a discussion around SPACs. They've been all over the news. I'm sure you guys have seen it fill your inbox, but more specifically talk about Desktop Metal's plan to go public via SPAC. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Dayna and Ric. Just a quick point of housekeeping. If you have any questions, please drop them in the chat and we will interject in the conversation to answer them. Let's keep this conversation dynamic. So ask all the questions you want. And Dayna, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Megan. And thanks everyone for attending on this Monday before Thanksgiving. And thank you, Ric. Ric, as he'll, I'm sure, tell you in just a few minutes, has been super busy right now. So literally going from meeting to meeting and squeezing this in what was hopefully a quiet Thanksgiving. But as we all know, holidays these days are just a continuation of every other day. Yeah. So Ric is super busy at Desktop. I will give a little bit of a kickoff in terms of just like how Ric and I got to know each other, and really want you guys to hear from him what they're doing at Desktop Metal, because it's just so exciting, and with and without the current news of the SPAC and what's going on. But Ric and I have known each other, what now? I don't know, maybe over a decade for sure. Ric and I had the pleasure of investing together in a previous life. And I was fortunate enough to be around Ric literally like in the same room when he was thinking about, spinning up Desktop Metal. And, knowing Ric, he's like lightning in a bottle is kind of how I describe him. Is nothing good happens while you wait if you don't get in on working with him soon in the process. So I told him I'd invest, and he's literally been off to the races ever since. One thing that I've been interested in investing in largely since we first started working together in 2015 with Desktop Metal is just the transformation of the manufacturing space. Metals and additive manufacturing are a big part of it. Moving things to the cloud, connecting processes is another big part of it. The logistics around it is even yet another big part of it. But none of it could really happen without really reconfiguring and reimagining like the factory floor itself, and how parts in this particular instance are literally reconstructed. Think about it as not only speeding up time and efficiency, but also shrinking down literally the machines and the events around and the factory around that to make it happen. And then with that comes, I think, some really creative financing structures, and that's where we can get into talking about SPACs. But Ric, do you want to just jump in and give them a little background on Desktop Metal for those who don't know?
Absolutely. So thank you, Dayna, and thank you very much to the whole race community for hosting this. I got into this whole manufacturing space as an entrepreneur. Previous company I had done, where Dayna worked at a firm that had invested in my company, and then eventually I went to work at that company, and I spent having some background in hardware. I spent some time developing a thesis on printing and different areas of the printing market where there was opportunity, and over time made several investments in 3D and 3D printing, and went on to start this company, which has done quite well. We are a market leader in our particular segment, make the world's fastest metal printers, and are now going to be a public company. Coming out of it will be the best capitalized, highest market cap company in the additive space, which is pretty cool. I think it's unclear if we would have done a SPAC if it wasn't for my friend Rob Johnson. So a good friend that I worked with before, who went on to be a partner at Kleiner and then did a company called Vertiv. And around March of this year, I saw him in the stock market ringing the bell on like a LinkedIn post, and I'm like, what is this guy doing ringing the bell? And they had gone public via SPAC, and it turned out to be a really good transaction. And in connecting with him, I didn't know what a SPAC was before this, by the way. So it's just you maybe hear it on the news, but it was a relatively new or reborn instrument with different terms that made it more applicable. But kind of put a data point in my head and talked to Rob. He encouraged me to explore it. And then around the summer post-COVID, during COVID, we were pretty aggressive at making sure that we were, this was our first rodeo, so we were pretty aggressive at cutting costs, opening up whatever variables we could to extend our runway, all sorts of things that other people were taking longer period to do. And then around this, June, July timeframe, we had a board meeting and we decided, another one of our colleagues said, what about doing a SPAC? And then we looked into it, and then before we know it, we were, it didn't took, we made up our minds relatively quickly that we were going to do this. And people say that it's it is just as much work as going public. I've gone public before. It is almost like more work because you have to do an M&A transaction followed by a PIPE fundraise, which is more complex than an IPO roadshow because you're not public and people are, the way lockups work and all that. So it's more stringent, and that's really what sets the price. And then beyond that, you have to do this SPAC process where you kind of rotate the entire base of the SPAC. Usually the people that put money in a SPAC in a trust are not the folks that end up owning the stock long term. Those are more risk arb funds, and so you have to rotate the capital there, and then you need to be trading with the right dynamics by the time after your vote, so that you end up with well-performing stock. So we've now 90% of the way there. We're in that final stretch where our vote is now on November 8th, and it's like a good 6 months. That's kind of what it took us when we went public the first time, decade plus ago. So it's really 6 months. You don't save any time, but it is an inversion of the process. In an IPO, you do your SEC paperwork, and then you go raise money from a group of investors and subscribe the deal, and then you kind of pare down of who gets in the deal, and you've got this discounting thing that we probably can get into a whole discussion. Whereas here, you raise the money first, and then you do the SEC process, and then you do your DSPAC.
Right. Actually, let me interject too right there to make sure folks understand that even before, you as Desktop Metal were targeted by a SPAC, the SPACs themselves raised money, some in some cases 12, 18 months ago. So, and for many on the call today, you may see other SPACs. I think there's been a record amount of new SPACs being raised this year. So SPACs are raised almost as like a empty fund to then go find promising companies such as Desktop Metal, then to acquire. And then it goes through a PIPE process, what Ric was talking about, and then what's called a de-SPACing process, which is what Ric is doing now to actually transform into, Desktop Metal as a public entity, which investors will then invest in from there on the public markets. So in some cases, these SPACs have been raised 12, 18 months ago. There's usually a period of up to 2 years sometimes that the SPACs are given to find their target. And they've become particularly in vogue this year. And we can talk about why. One of my hypotheses, which Ric, I'd love, for you to zoom out and think, just more along that trend, is they seem to work, I think, and ostensibly will seem to work really well for industrial related companies, similar to maybe some healthcare companies of the past that have gone public. When they go through FDA approval or when they go through clinical trials, phase 3 clinical trials is something you hear about a lot about in the clinical world that makes a company set off in a different path. Typically in the tech world, we don't have anything to judge a company by except for prospective, discounted cash flows or current revenue or recurring revenue or profits, gross margin, whatever it is, just the financials. And this year, I think we've seen the marriage of SPACs with industrial companies in particular as being a really exciting thing.
Yeah, it's for sure a frontier business. Can be fine this way. One benefit is you've got the ability to talk about forward-looking, present a plan, and whereas you got a quiet period and other constraints on a conventional IPO. But either way, I would say that I'm not sure how it's a unique moment in time. I think COVID had a big impact in why this works, because you're simplifying the. I mean, it's unclear how you do a roadshow with the traditional IPO, but a PIPE is more like a private raise, and that's something that lent itself more towards, and it lent the fact that these type of vehicles had a ticking bomb on the amount of time that they could wait until they could find a target or they have to return the money. They started accepting a virtual roadshow as a way to continue to look at businesses. So SPAC is like a venture fund that they have to make an investment within a period of time, or they have to return the money. And the investors that invest in the SPAC still have to approve the business at the end of the day. So it's not like they can lower the quality. And then as a second quality bar, you've got the PIPE capital, which is actually institutional investors from the public markets that then actually have to validate the deal, sort of endorse it before it goes to the public markets. And so you get a double bar. However, it became possible to do that over Zoom, which just was not the case before. And because you went into the market with a fully subscribed deal, then it made it a self-fulfilling prophecy. You actually could finish a transaction and go public. And so, whereas in a regular IPO, you would have kind of filed a prospectus and then you go on a roadshow, and to do the roadshow all by Zoom and now it's probably more normal. But I think that's what kind of uncorked this whole segment, and it allowed a number of deals to happen in the early part of the year. What's happened is so much SPAC capital got raised that now there's not enough PIPE capital. And so there's an imbalance there. There's an overhang of SPAC. So it's actually, the window's actually shut down as we speak. If we raised our money in the summer when we did our PIPE, if you tried to go out and do a SPAC now, it'd be very, very difficult to get PIPE capital, to get your deal closed. So I have friends in the market now that are totally jammed and with their feet in the mud, can't get a deal done. So that's a unique characteristics. Like all markets, there's windows, and they open and close. If you have a portfolio company and you think you're going to do what we did in the summer, the window's actually shut down right now, which is an interesting. Maybe it opens up itself in the spring again, and you can get a PIPE done, but it's pretty shut right now for new offerings. So I think the last real one they got out was Ava, and there's 15 deals. I talked to a banker yesterday that's a friend, and there's 15 deals jammed right now. So this, I think it's the spring where it maybe reopens if the market kind of works out, but it will. I mean, because you've got what's going to happen? Probably some of them will slowly get out, and then more capital gets reallocated to pipes. Regular mutual funds and most funds can't, traditionally don't do pipes. They have more restrictions in what they can put money in. So there's I was talking to, Mark Stad at Dragoneer, and he's got 2 SPACs, and also to another friend, Brad Gerson has a SPAC, got a fund called Altimeter, and then these 2, telling Brad they are probably they should do a pipe fund instead of a SPAC fund instead of doing another SPAC.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, but there is an interesting, this is where there's a shortage.
It's interesting to think. I mean, as Ric and Megan certainly at first round is too, but as we are at Construct, I didn't go into my background at the beginning, which I probably should have, because I invested in Ric's company when I was a partner at NEA and knew him, as he mentioned, when we at a previous firm when I was in Boston called Northbridge. We were investors in his last company, but now spun off and raised an early stage venture fund called Construct. And one thing about being an early stage investor, as Megan knows, and Ric too, is, early stage investing is sort of eternal. I think you can't really time markets at the early stage. You just have to keep, investing in great new entrepreneurs. And there's anything that's going to be constant in this world. There aren't many things, but I think people starting new companies will always be a constant. When you get to SPACs or going public, or, there are definitely windows to these markets, and a lot of different factors that make different windows attractive. That maybe just the fact that there's an election year and COVID and everything made it more difficult for the regular IPO process to really go as planned or smoothly, or, just frankly what they're used to. And that gave rise to different ways to rethink the process and rethink it. But on the heels of that, like what Ric is alluding to, is so much new SPAC capital has been raised. And, given that they have 12 to 24 months usually to find that target, but then it requires the pipe, as he mentioned, and a lot of other things coming together, most of which also rely on finding a viable target of companies growing. So really robust other unicorn-like companies that we think about in the venture markets have to exist during that window.
Dayna,
attractive.
Just jumping in with a quick question from Laura in the audience. She wanted to know, what makes a company attractive to a SPAC? What are they looking for when they're finding that company?
I think that you need a really large market, very large addressable market with unique economics, and because it has lent itself. I don't know if it's the best use of a SPAC approach, but for some reason when there was a run up on Tesla, a number of EV SPACs got out. I don't know if there's very high quality there, but it enabled them to get out of long-term projections. We're a unique element in the SPAC space as a result. Companies like us or DraftKings, people that have, we have revenue and real, operating business today that's growing with a large TAM that's now particular TAM's expanding from 12 billion to 146 billion by the end of the decade. So it's in a growing segment. But I would say that it's like raising a growth equity round. You're going to folks that are looking at it with a particular lens, and it has to be a large enough market, and it has to kind of be a story that they feel like. The number one consideration, will the pipe actually invest in this? I would say, is advice to entrepreneurs. You want to be mutually exclusive with the SPAC when you sign an LOI. If you're not mutually exclusive, they basically can literally like sign you up, and then they keep looking at other deals, and that's not a place you want to be in. So one piece of advice that they don't give you is like, and the banks won't tell you, they're looking, that you really need to be mutually exclusive with the SPAC that you signed up with. And we insisted in that in our deal. You want to be also well capitalized, because this process can take a while. There is an alternative to a pipe, which is what Peter Thiel did with Luminar. Luminar is a company that went public via SPAC, and he did what's called a Series X. In typical Peter Thiel fashion, he invented something new that was a different way of doing, and that is more like a late stage mezzanine round that closes concurrent with the SPACing process. And it comes in at a discount because the people committed the capital before the SPAC gets signed up. So you go to a SPAC already with your capital for the pipe raised through a Series X. And not a lot of press has gone into that architecture. Obviously people are getting a discount, and, I don't know. I think if you're a high quality company, you can raise a pipe.
So Rick, as you thought about it, maybe if there are people on the call today with companies that have been targeted by SPACs or are talking to SPACs, what other advice would you give them and how to choose the right one?
Boy, that's a great question, Dayna. I think, look, we had 9. We went out to the market, and we were lucky that we had a good business plan and something that resonated with those investors. And we had 9 firms that wanted to work with us. We'd settled it down to like 3, and these were kind of like the design of those 3 firms. One was like the chairman of a Fortune 500, or the vice chairman of a Fortune 500 company. Very, very like shiny object, but it had really crazy economics. That's the other thing. The SPACs, you can negotiate the economics that the promoter is the person who runs the SPAC. And then we had the one that we signed up with, which was Leo Hendry, which is a world-class legend, Wall Street type of individual, very high-class individual. Leo did many things like Liberty Media and TCI and a variety of large, very successful businesses. And he's fantastic. So we're excited he's going to be joining our board. And then the next one would be somebody like a smaller group of folks that had done some venture and had been in some cool deals, but this was like a first time. They didn't have like a huge track record, and they were the first ones to give us an LOI, and we kind of got excited about that. And we are fortunate that they had a total wipeout when we said we need exclusivity mutually. They didn't have their setup right, so they went to their board. SPACs have boards, by the way. So they went to their board to get approval. The boards have to approve the transactions. Think about it, it's a publicly traded entity, and they have, as a result, a requirement to have a board. And their board was a bunch of private equity folks from places like fancy private equity firms that had kind of given these younger folks the money. And they're like, well, what do you mean we need to do mutual exclusivity? Blah, 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 blah. And then before you know it, that had like delayed it a few days. And then Leo swooped in and took the deal. And we ended up coming up with great, we're very happy with the final deal that we ended up with. And I would say that that was just as stressful as like a real M&A transaction. I don't know if you ever done real M&A, but it's usually like, it's not that simple, you have
yeah,
to go.
Rick is, and you would all imagine on this call that this took, 6-9 months. We're at, what are we at now? 6 weeks into the process? When you say it took
it takes
6 months, that all took really
yeah.
quickly. Yeah, it went really quickly.
Yeah. And then you do the pipe, which is a real effort. That is like a lot of meetings and execution. And then you do and then it comes the fun part. I mean, it's the S4 and all the SEC process. You need to have like a team of people that can execute it. Like our S4 was 700 pages. You got to write 700 pages. It sounds like you can do it, but you really, like, it really takes a team of people. So God bless our CFO. She deserves like a Mother Teresa. She did not sleep for many weeks to get that whole thing written up. And when we had COVID, we cut pretty hard very quickly. We weren't going to everybody was thinking, oh, what's the recovery? I'm going to wait and see if it's U shape, K shape, this shape, whatever shape. And I think very quickly, I remember talking to Dayna. I talk to Dayna every week. So she's like one of the people that I talk the most in our whole board. And she's got great advice and a really incredible sounding board. So for any entrepreneurs, how many people on the list here? Any of the 83 people that are starting a company, definitely talk to Dayna. She's fantastic. So I think we were worried about what would happen with COVID. We took pretty deep cuts. I mean, we took our finance team, our G&A team, down to 3 people in April. And we let go. We had a fully staffed go public M&A team, finance, G&A team, and we took it down to 3 people. And then 3 months later, we say we're going public. Now, these 3 people had done 3 IPOs on average, so they were talented and very experienced. We didn't have like a junior team, but we had to rebuild everything, and in like a very short period of time. And then we had to write an S4 and then like supplement all this. So now we have a fully staffed team again, but it's like we had to do it all, and like we were going great. We took the cuts because we're not gonna like not, we were well capitalized. We had 100 and well over $100 million in the bank at the time, and we're like, okay, it's not like we're not going out of business, but we want to, this could be a 2-year situation, who knows? So we cut, and then we rehired, and I think now, we're very grateful for our G&A team that was able to do all that work. But what people don't realize is that it seems like it's all easy, but like you better have a good GC, you better have a great CFO, you better have a great VP of finance, you better have a great controller, and then the supporting staff, FP&A, all the stuff that you need to do, like run like a public company. And it helps if they've done more than one IPO before, if you're going to do this, at least one, or it's harder to do it.
Yeah, I think that's another thing.
Go
Sorry,
ahead, Dayna.
just really quickly, that, with the way Ric had managed Desktop Metal, not many companies, operate like they are kind of staffed to go public, even if, like Ric said, he did happen to lay off a few, but was able to build them back. Things like having the right GC, having the right CFO from day one, or from at least day 2. You don't want to be stuck without any options, or with great options that you can't execute because you don't have the right team on board, or you haven't set the right processes in place. As a startup, I've often had this debate with other companies of whether to do audits or not do audits routinely. Audits, to me, while you might not want to do them in year zero or year 1, by the time you get out to like year 2 or 3, whether it's an M&A or something like this comes up, when you've done an audit, you're ready to evaluate them. And that's something else that Ric and team had done along the way.
Yeah,
that was really helpful.
We were somewhat ready to do what we needed to do.
And Ric,
Yep.
you mentioned that Dayna was extremely helpful throughout the process. For all the investors on the line who may be experiencing this with their companies, what do you think is like the most important role that your investor or your boards can play, so people can learn as they experience this themselves?
Well, I think there's not one thing. I mean, it's the amount of work to do this is much more, like you got to run a company plus do all this stuff. So you need just ensure the company has the right teams, or can staff the right teams while they're trying to do this. You need a really good finance team, and you're in a really good GC, and the rest of the business, obviously you need to have visibility into your revenue and into what the operating plan looks like. In our particular company, we're really well positioned right now. We're going from 1 product to 4 products, and an expanding channel situation. And so I think I feel really good about that. I think the way that this is not meant for this. There's other ways to go public, whether it's a direct listing, if you don't need to raise the cash, or a regular IPO. Those are just as valid ways to do it. This isn't a shortcut. It's just another way to do it. It's well suited to the type of company that DM is, but it's not perfect for everything.
Yeah.
And you really do have
another thing. Yeah, another thing that Ric did along the way, but also has really focused on, in addition to the 10 other things in completing the SPAC, is building a really robust board. It's something else that, founders, especially year 3, 4 in the company, need to be thinking about, but probably push off until later. Everyone likes the concept of small boards, but I can attest to it, and I'm sure Ric will too, that in addition to his GC and everyone else, there are many really active people on the board that now, as a soon to be public company, you have to have different committees. So people have to, the board has to grow up overnight, and in terms of formal processes and stuff.
This thing of like running
really
the bit
helpful that he'd already built out the board along the way.
what Dayna brought up a great point. I mean, I don't understand. There's been like a aversion to like not having control. People have oversight over a company in the past. I don't understand it. I think entrepreneurs are kind of afraid of having some it used to be that boards were like kind of, you worked on developing a good board, and then we went through this period of time when like people wanted to have like a tiny board of 3 to 5 people, and the founders were very protective of that. And what you end up with companies with little oversight and poor governance and no ability to do a move like what we did, because they just wouldn't have the people for the committees. They'd be like behind the power curve recruiting. It's just Mickey Mouse type of operation, very difficult to execute properly. So I think we were lucky. We had a fantastic fully staffed board with independence and everything that you needed to like also be able to hit the ground running when we were ready. So I'd highly encourage folks that want to consider this in their kind of, you have a checklist of things to do, build a great board, get your committees working efficiently like you would in a public company, be able to close books, in the right timing, get a great G&A team that would have the capacity to do this, get your 2 years of PCAB compliant audit financials, and then you can like go to town. There's if you got a great company and you're growing and your TAM is massive, this is a totally legit way to like get to the public markets where you're going to be worth a lot more than you would in the private markets, and you have ability to have more degrees of freedom in how you grow the business.
Yep. Ric, for those, we haven't spent a lot of time just telling people how exciting it is, some of the stuff you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give everyone just a quick glimpse of the day-to-day and, what you can say to this type of group about what you're doing at Desktop? Because it is, for the folks on this call, it's a swath of investors across the industry, from consumer to early stage to later stage to venture. Maybe there's private equity on here too.
Mostly investors, or is
folks
it
interested in additive? And probably few folks on the call that invest in manufacturing as a category, much less 3D printing or metals. So,
okay.
Can you tell everyone a little bit about additive manufacturing, what's so great about it, and what you can say about what you guys are doing?
Awesome. Yeah. So we are in a category of manufacturing called additive. It's a very small fraction of the world of manufacturing, but it allows you to make products digitally as opposed to through a tool, which would be an analog way of making a product. And the tool would be, let's say, a mold or a die that you would use to stamp a part or extrude a part. I think we are in a segment that had its initial period of development around prototyping and tooling, and in the past couple of years it's matured into end-use part production, which is where our company lives. So we make the world's fastest metal printers. They used to print all sorts of components, from rocket engines to components to automotive interior parts to things that a machine shop would have produced. And particularly, we're totally focused on end-use part production with metal, which I think is the fastest growing segment in our industry. There are a number of other applications outside of metal that are exciting. In particular, we have a process that leads much lower cost parts. Our parts are processed about 100 times faster than the laser systems that we are disrupting, and make parts at 1/20th the cost. So
think about like for folks to get the magnitude of that, Ric, also, you're probably getting ready to say this next, but I use this analogy a lot of like the supercomputer of the 70s to like the microprocessor, that, while those machines behind Ric and here look big, that happens to be their large format printer. Desktop Metal is shrunken down to a desktop version of a machine that literally cost $1 million. and he sells it for a tenth of that, and was much, much, much slower and more expensive. So I remember seeing one of these in a factory of a large conglomerate I won't mention the name of, that I toured, and this was several years ago, and they were, when I looked at what they were manufacturing, it was so slow, and they were just manufacturing like little versions of their logo to show off like what they could manufacture versus actually manufacturing real parts in the machines. And I asked why, and they said it was just too slow and too expensive, and they had to stop the machine in between and clean it off and do all these things to replace materials. But the promise of something like that is sitting behind Ric is like a whole factory, just in that one box, being able to produce parts that supply the larger metal companies you and I would both know, all of their supply in like a year's worth of power in that machine behind it.
Yeah, so it's about 100x the throughput and 1/20th the cost versus legacy powder bed fusion. Yeah. So.
Yeah. All right, so that's what you're doing. And you gave us some crystal ball on SPACs going forward. Someone asked me in a private question versus to the group here. This year we've seen just in the venture world just so much capital be raised, and that's let alone the SPAC world. Is there anything you feel like really driving this, swath of capital, kind of looking for new places to capitalize on the number of companies being started?
Great question. I mean, I think there's never been a better time to start a company, I think, than now. It's definitely a time to build. I think there is, however, an arbitrage between the public and the private markets. I think that when the Fed expanded their balance sheet and did other things like that, it really drove liquidity in the public markets that never really, while it can get raised in the private markets, it's not as the valuations there's a disparity. I think if you were trying to raise a late stage private round versus do something in the public space. So I think there's a huge opportunity now with this type of financing to really open up. It really creates a path for a broader number of companies to actually reach the public markets. It is kind of sad. We have less offerings in the public markets today than we had for a long time. We have half the number of public companies today than we did a decade ago. And so it is that's because there's been a lot of M&A. And so there is a huge opportunity to sort of increase the number of kind of growth stories that people can have access to. Unfortunately, the traditional IPO process has become one where as a lot of the small banks that focused on back 20 years ago, you'd had Hambrecht and Quist, and you'd have most of you folks may not remember these names, but you have Robertson Stevens, and you'd have Montgomery Securities and Alex Brown, and people had their specialty was to take startups public. That doesn't exist in the market in the same construct today, and we went through a period of time where the bar to go public in a traditional IPO, it went from like 70 to 100 million, not 200 million, and then like you can't get out if you don't have a $2 billion market cap. And so it turns it into a very difficult way to access the market. And I think that has to do with the economics in banking and distribution and decimalization going away. So what we've ended up is now, I think, with this mechanism as a way to enable a way to go public. There's an underpricing element also to IPOs. I remember when I took my previous company public, the night before the offering, we had a whole IPO. We selected who was going to get the stock, and it was nobody got their orders filled. It's all special clients for the bank that ended up getting orders, and they ended up flipping it when the stock pops. And it's one giant exercise that I think in that particular deal we left several $100 million on the table and as a company. And one of the benefits in a SPAC is that you you are able to, you don't have an underpricing situation or less likely to, you get to be the allocator and you end up with a larger amount of cash for your balance sheet. So those are all three unique benefits I think I preferred out of this transaction. You do need to, I mean, it's more work. There's no question about that. It's not easier. It's actually more work. But I think it's, you also kind of have a little bit more control on your timeline. At the end of the day, the best control on your timeline is to end up with a window. Right now, if you're trying to do this like today, you should have had to do this, like you should have done this like 6 months ago when the window was open on the pipes. So this is very hard to do like this week. January could change again. So the windows for public market are always changing. And I mean, we've got Airbnb and a few other IPOs that will go out, and I think that may change the flow. So
it's amazing to think. I mean, it's you know, my best advice is to entrepreneurs on the call, you know, watching Ric is, you know, the old adage of like nothing good happens while you wait. If you feel like there's a window, or feel like there's an opportunity to start a company, to raise money, to, you know, recruit someone who's really talented, who might, who you just feel like you've been tracking and is available now, like do it when the window is there. And then you can always decide later in the case of hiring or whatnot that you can undo those decisions. But Ric is one of the fastest and most accurate decision makers you'll meet, and doesn't sit on things. Literally, I think, you know, when I first gave Ric a term sheet, I think if I hadn't gotten him to, if I hadn't sent it over that night at 10 a.m., I'm not sure I would have been in Desktop Metal. He would have decided differently by the morning.
I did make it competitive, but that's not true. Yeah.
Ric, a quick question from the audience. Are you seeing a broader or different set of investors entering pipes than has been the case in the past?
No, there's, I mean, institutional capital, I think every firm, the large pools of capital have some you know, they can, if you're at Fidelity, you may need to have a certain amount of coverage, or, you know, for them to pick up a stock. If you're like, I mean, they all have like different levels of thresholds, and I think it's even harder for a pipe capital. It tends to be more special situations, and that's one of the issues. I think somebody in the Bay Area should start a fund to do this and to sort of like validate the big, instead of like have one bite at the apple, end up in like several large companies with large allocations. If you had access to the capital to put something together, and I think you even have other benefits doing that. But I think that there's definitely going to be a lot of high quality. The bar has gone up, so this is a filter. This is, you know, markets work, and they have their own filter mechanisms, and I think that the fact that the pipe capital is more limited creates a filter mechanism for SPACs. I mean, we had a fantastic pipe attached to our deal. We had Chamath, we had Bill Miller, and the founders of Tesla. We had lots of high quality people attached to our deal, and then that's the result of, we had a good high quality story, but it is I would say something that we had to work to make happen. It doesn't happen on its own. You have to cast a wide net and find the people that are interested in what you're doing. And I think you have that. There's definitely an opportunity if somebody wanted to be in the pipe business right now. If I'm giving an advice to somebody that's a money manager or capital allocator and may consider starting a SPAC, they should start a pipe fund instead.
That's free advice for any of you on the call. Trust me, you should take it. Ric sees these things in real time, and every time he's had good ideas and I haven't done them, I've regretted.
Cool.
Okay. Megan, what other questions do we have from the audience?
Another question, and this kind of dovetails next in terms of, is your process done? And if not, what are the next steps? And then I think maybe to wrap up, you know, what are the plans for Desktop Metal post SPAC?
I think we put our plans out. We have a fantastic portfolio of products that is expanding with today 4 products that they're going to continue to expand. We had a fully funded organic plan ahead of the SPAC process, and now with the SPAC process, we're going to have $625 million in cash coming out of it, and so we may do some things that are inorganic, that are interesting technologies that where we can actually bring value, and we have distribution in 60 countries today with 90 partners, and so we can add to that distribution with unique things and strengthen our channel. I'd say it really depends on we're going to be very selective there, but I do feel like we are going to focus 100% on our organic plan, and we feel good about our numbers and continue to grow the company.
Ric, what else, for folks that do invest in and around the industrial space, things that you've seen that a Desktop Metal may not be in your area, but you'd say, geez, would love to see, like something I see and scratch my head about all the time is, how can you unlock greater usage of the cloud or hybridization or virtualization in these environments? Not those in particular, but in and around the factory floor, if you imagine the factory of the future, what do you think is kind of holding back the industry outside of additive manufacturing? Which
I've been living in a microcosm of additive, so I've been like just 100% focused on parts and mass production. But I can tell you that in the parts business today, used to make prototypes and not parts, and now we're making parts but not products. And one day we'll print products cost effectively, more multi-material type modalities to make components. And so there's a long window of innovation just in our own sub-segment. I'd say,
what about data? What about all the data generated on the factory floor? Do you guys leverage that yet?
I think it's very hard to like make a business out of factory floor data, although it may be possible. People want to keep it for themselves. It's their own. They don't want to share it, and so you can't get a network effect between multiple factories. But I do think that in the engineering software space, where I was an investor before, I'm a huge fan of new tools, particularly multi-part optimization tools. So things like ability to do generative design where the physics drives the design, but that exists today in a single part model basis, and in the future you'll be able to have all the components linked so that they can you're spending your time as an engineer inputting the physics and the mating locations where how something would go together, and then having those systems at a high level define the shapes based on the physics that the product's going to see. So it would be kind of that doesn't exist. Somebody should develop that. We've never lived in a greater time where more compute power and ease of manufacturing components, and I think that we have a really bright future ahead. I'm a huge fan of electric aviation, so I kind of lived the first wave of automotive electrification, and was a part of that. I think there's a huge opportunity in aviation right now, and electrification of aviation. Now we're in you'd think this is like the worst time to do something like that because the aerospace market is in the toilet and no one's traveling because of COVID and all this. But I do think that I don't know. I think that there's a huge opportunity in personal aviation, and there's a huge opportunity in one day somebody developing kind of a 30 megawatt class propulsion system that's fully electric for aerospace. And I think that if done properly could have very broad applicability across many airframes. And so
without being biased towards one sector of your customer base versus the others, what can you say about any sectors like auto versus aviation versus just space in general that are adapting or adopting rather, adapting to and adopting new manufacturing methods fast, and are kind of laying out the groundwork for the
It's
future.
super
Any
horizontal.
anecdotes you can see any anecdotes of, you know, anonymized customer stories that are doing some really innovative things, or laying out frameworks in your customer set or industries. But I think where you were going was, you were about to say it's super horizontal.
Yeah, it's super horizontal. There's no one particular space. It's like, you know, broad adoption in many sectors, which is actually awesome to see.
Yeah. What Ric has not talked about a lot on this call is he has several different machines. So he's got the desktop version, he's got a sort of a miniature production system, and then he's got the larger production system that you see behind him, that can really do volume and massive parts in some of the bigger industrial use cases. But he's done a good job of kind of, you know, the desktop version might be great for some of the prototyping, you know, so occasionally as you
We
get into
actually
the
have a we don't refer to it as desktop. So we have a studio system that's an end-use part production solution for like low volume. Then we have mid-range volume in like our shop system, which is really geared towards machine shops and producing parts in mid-range volumes at scale. And then we have our production systems, which can do like high volume automotive and all the components. Although you could take our shop system and make parts for vehicles as well and for other components. So it's definitely all are pretty cost effective and incredible products.
Right. So he's done, point is, you know, Ric has done a great job with the company of kind of canvassing the whole landscape, and, you know, regardless of what industry or what kind of use case you're in, you can use a different combination of the products for different things, and really designing, you know, what that future factory could look like. And I think they're in a great spot to own that footprint. I'm biased, of course. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for joining us. Ric, thank you so much for taking time. I know it's an extremely busy time for you, so we appreciate it. And everyone who dialed in, have a happy Thanksgiving, and we'll see you all soon.
All right, guys. Dayna, thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks, Ric. Thanks, Megan, for organizing this.